Welcome to Lead Pods, the official leadership podcast from USMB for pastors and church leaders, where our goal is to increase our impact together.
Hello friends, welcome to episode 132 of the USMB Lead Pods. My name is Matt Ayersman, and as always, so grateful to have some time with you today to share another really great episode. Today, I'm excited to welcome back a friend of the podcast and a longtime friend of mine. Erica Haude is back with us today. Erica is a licensed counselor who works with a wide variety of people. As you'll see, even from our conversation today, Erica is a really gifted therapist who is able to really help people understand what they're going through, name what they're going through, and help them take meaningful steps forward. Today, we tackle several very relevant and timely topics, things about how to deal with anxiety and depression, honestly what the difference is between those two things. I think a lot of us struggle to really define what those things even are, and how our faith can help us really support and help us overcome those things. I think sometimes faith and mental health are kind of pinned against each other, and they really don't have to be. So Erica has some really great and practical tips for us as church leaders of how to deal with this ourselves, but also how to help those in our church who might be struggling with anxiety or depression. And again, Erica does a great job of doing this from a Christian worldview, grounded in Scripture. I think you'll find a lot of her tips to be really helpful and, again, really practical. So let's take a quick break to hear from this week's sponsor, and then we'll get to my conversation with Erica Haude.
Today's podcast is sponsored by Mennonite Central Committee. Are you ready for a challenge? This summer, let's pack 25,000 MCC school kits for 25,000 kids around the world. For the chance to win a pizza party, gather your supplies and drop off your school kits during the month of August to be counted. An activity resource packet is available for VBS and Sunday school. Learn more at mcc.org/challenge.
All right, my friends. Well, today I'm excited to have one of my friends back, an old friend of mine. We have Erica Haude joining us back again. She's been on the podcast before. Erica is a licensed clinical professional counselor at Central Kansas Counseling in Hillsboro. Also does some work in Heston and also serves on the Southern District Board of Faith and Life. So Erica, I'm just honored to have you back. Thanks for coming back.
It's fun to be back. Thanks for the invitation. Yeah.
Yes.
We go back a ways. So
we do. I think last time you were on, we both made a pact that neither of us would pull up any photos from 2004 to 2006, right?
I think that's fair.
So when I was in high school, Erica was, I guess, were you an intern or what was your?
I interned, and then I was the interim youth pastor after Neil before.
Yes.
Yeah.
Before Ben came.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, Ben and then Kyle. Yep, that's right. Yep.
So I overlapped with you a little bit back when I was in high school back in those days, and it's fun that we get to stay connected. So it's great to see you again.
Absolutely.
So I gave a little bit of information, but what else do we miss? You want to tell us more about your family, kind of specifics about what your job looks like? What other bio stuff can we throw in here?
Yeah, sure. Like you said, I'm a clinical professional counselor. I work out of the Heston and Hillsboro offices. I do a lot with EMDR. So EMDR's kind of been in the news a little bit recently. Miley Cyrus. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Nice.
There was an article that came out where she talked about the impact that EMDR therapy has had in her life. And so there's I think there's some buzz around that. There has been for a while, but
really quickly, can you define that if people don't know what that is?
Sure. Yeah. So EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. So it's a big, long title for essentially a treatment approach for trauma, but it's also used a lot with anxiety and depression, even OCD. There's a lot of kind of ways that we've found that it's helpful to apply that, but it is essentially processing memories. And I can kind of go into that more. Even today, we're kind of going to talk about anxiety, and I can talk about how you use that with anxiety. But yeah, it's a really great integrated treatment approach. So yeah, that's what it stands for. If there's kind of more information, happy to kind of dive into that more.
Cool. Awesome. And you've been in your office for almost 5 years. And I'm sure you see just about all kinds of things. I'm sure every day is an adventure for you. You see clients that are struggling with a lot of things, or some people maybe aren't necessarily even struggling. They need someone to process their thoughts. Or counseling might be kind of new to some people listening. Maybe some people listening have never been to therapy. So what does kind of a normal day look like for you? What kinds of things are you talking with people about?
So I specifically say kind of ages 10 and up. So kind of across the lifespan. I have a couple kiddos that I see that are 7 or 8, and that's different. Everybody kind of decides what their demographics are that they work with. I I really love working with teenagers. That's kind of a population that I have worked with throughout my career, all the way back to when I was doing youth stuff. But I really
Yeah.
love teens, and that has been something that brings me a lot of joy. It's a lot of fun. So I do see a lot of teenagers and young adults as well, but I all the way up through, yeah, like I said, 60s and 70s even. So every day is really different, and both in terms of the demographics, but also in kind of what people are bringing into the therapy room, and where they're at as far as, like you said, some people are coming in and they are kind of in crisis, and others are maybe, like we talk about, like the wellness line, and their wellness, they're just wanting to kind of increase their overall like mental, emotional, spiritual wellness, right? So
Yeah.
some people are kind of a ways below that wellness line and feel like they're kind of in crisis and need help kind of just getting up to that point. Other people are hovering at a pretty decent place maybe and just feeling like there's more. I want more. So yeah, counseling doesn't have to be something just for when we feel like life's completely falling apart. I think it can be a very proactive way that we kind of say, hey, I want to be as healthy as I can be. And so, yeah, see people kind of all across that spectrum.
Yeah. And we've talked on this show before, I think probably when you were on and other therapists that we've had on, I think we're finally in a space and a time and culture where there's not quite as much stigma. I think people are talking about it more openly than they used to. I think you probably still have a ways to go, but I think we've made a lot of progress and people are at least willing to talk about it. And I guess it's kind of fascinating to me. I think anxiety, depression have existed as long as people have existed, right? But it does seem like there's maybe this kind of heightened awareness, or maybe I think maybe we're just all more stressed out than our ancestors were hundreds of thousands of years ago. Do you feel like we're kind of on an uptick are you seeing an anxiety uptick in your patients, or post-COVID, has it gone down a little bit, or how do you kind of frame all of that?
Yeah. There's some really interesting kind of research coming out that I think is wrestling with that exact question. There's a book called Anxious Generation. It's kind of, at least in my world, there's a lot of talk around that book recently. And anyway, I think the case he's making in that is that there is a generation, kind of, we would say maybe the teens and 20s currently, that because of social media and because of some of technology, that we are noticing how that is increasing anxiety, that there is an increase in anxiety and depression levels. So I would say, yes, have those things always been there? Sure, absolutely. Are there maybe some factors that we currently deal with that are unique in how they're impacting our mental and emotional health? I think yes. So the answer to that is both, right? Like, I think anxiety and depression is something that has been there in generations before. And I think our willingness to name that and talk about that is changing, which is great. I also think that there are some specific ways that we're realizing how technology, social media, globalization, maybe even, like, are affecting our mental health. Yeah.
Well, you just mentioned naming it. I think it might be helpful to even define some of these things, because I think we kind of throw out anxiety and depression, but I think those are not the same. And some people might mean different things when they say those words. So how would you define those? How are they related and different?
Sure. It's tricky. I think sometimes it's helpful to think about anxiety and depression as two sides of the same coin.
Okay.
One of the ways that I often talk about that with clients is, if you think about, and I'm going to talk kind of like neurobiology here for a second, in our nervous system, anxiety essentially is a hyper arousal. It's an elevated state. And we can kind of get into that a little bit more if that's helpful. Whereas depression would be like a hypo arousal. So when we say hypo, meaning kind of low, right? Like, and so if we think about, right, if you even just visually think about hyper up and hypo down, they're two sides of that same coin. So what's tricky is oftentimes they can go hand in hand, or people can feel like they vacillate between the two. Not always. Sometimes people are like, actually, I just feel depressed, or I just feel anxious. Though what I find is a lot of times people who deal with heightened levels of anxiety, your nervous system can only maintain that for so long before your system essentially kind of overrides and says, we got to dip. So oftentimes people who would say, I deal with a kind of a high level of anxiety most of the time, probably also have periods of depression, because we just aren't designed to live in this kind of heightened hyper arousal for so long. Our body, you talk about what's happening at a kind of physiological level. We just can't maintain that. And so that's where it can dip down into that hypoarousal. So I often have clients think about that and aware of like, yeah, what are the things that send me up? And what are the things that kind of depress or keep me down? Because when we think about anxiety and depression as in terms of like nervous system activation, that can be really helpful.
Yeah, that is helpful. And so I think a natural question a lot of people ask, and forgive me, we may have talked about some of this last time we were on. We'll get to some new stuff if we are covering some ground here. But I think a question a lot of people have is, how do I know if I need help? Like, what's normal? We all feel anxious. We all feel stressed. Most of us feel busy, and we've got a lot on our plate. So how do you kind of work that through with people of when's the kind of a warning sign that deserves some further attention?
Yeah. One of my favorite questions to ask people is, where is it getting in the way? How's it getting in the way of functioning in your life the way that you desire to? So that can be just a really helpful reflection for people to stop and say, like, is this keeping me from showing up in my life the way I want, in my relationships? And, it's keeping me from going and doing the things I want to do, or, interacting with life the way I want to. I think that can be a helpful place of like, man, it is getting in the way. It's getting in the way of, and here are the ways here's how it's getting in the way. That can be a helpful place. And then I think to just say, like, I think about like if we were wanting to like learn something new or do something, we didn't have the skills. It's like, I don't know how to get from point A to point B. Well, then you would go seek counsel or help. And I think, counseling can be that. It's like, okay, so I'm identifying that there's some things that are getting in the way of me living the way I want, feeling the way I want, interacting with people the way I desire to. And I don't know how to get there. Well, I think that might be an indication, like maybe something like counseling could be really helpful, right? Because we can come alongside you and say, like, here's some tools, or here are some things that we could do to help clear the path a little bit from A to B.
Yep. Super helpful. And I know obviously you have a faith background, you're actively involved even on Faith and Life, which I love and appreciate. I know some people still have a little bit of like, what's the Christian role in this, right? Like, I think some Christians even avoid therapy altogether because it feels like it is almost opposite of faith. So I'm sure you've heard a lot of those different arguments. How do you, either in your practice or just yourself personally, how do you kind of hold faith and therapy together?
It's a great question. And for me, and kind of what that looks like in my practice, it's meeting clients where they're at. As what is their understanding of faith, and like, how does that integrate in their life, and, kind of meeting them where they're at. I think what's really, really beautiful is like both in terms of like EMDR, there's another kind of therapy approach that I use a lot called internal family systems. And as I've like really learned those and used those and applied those, I've seen how they like so beautifully like weave, like faith is there, right? And like how it can be integrated in really helpful ways. And it's not one or the other, that we can bring kind of all parts into kind of the therapy room and into the work that we do. So, and I would say, like, for people who feel hesitant, it's like, find a good fit, find a good fit of a therapist who you feel like kind of can work within your worldview well and integrate the parts of you that you want to kind of bring into that relationship. Yeah, there's a lot of really wonderful therapists out there who operate from a faith perspective and integrate these things. And really, there's a lot of research out there about how to do this well. Like, people don't realize there's an actual, we learned this. It's a piece of what we learn is how to integrate spirituality and faith into our work, whether that's from a Christian worldview or not. But so I think to say we don't have to check that at the door. And we're not asking people to check that at the door. We're asking them to bring their full self, and we want to meet them in that place. And so, yeah, I hope that, somebody hearing this would say, oh, so it's not just this secular thing that,
Yeah, right.
like there's an integration that happens and that can be really, really beautiful.
Well, part of the kind of church tradition is that a lot of people go to their pastor for this kind of direction or help or whatever. And I think there are times when a pastor's training is helpful, dealing with anxiety or whatever. And then there's times when I think your training is probably maybe more appropriate. So a lot of our listeners are pastors or church leaders. So what would you say if one of them, if they feel like how do they know what they can help with versus what might need a professional therapist? How have you kind of gauged that pastor versus counselor situation?
Yeah, I think one of the things that you're naming is like I think it's an important question for pastors to ask themselves as far as like, what is my level of training? What is what's my scope here of like how much I feel like I can manage? And I think it's an important thing for pastors to spend some time like thinking about and seeking counsel on. And being able to say, okay, where does that boundary lie for me of what I feel like I can walk with people in, and at what point do I need to kind of pass the baton to someone? I think similarly, like as a therapist, I have a scope of practice. I have an idea of like, at what point do I need to refer someone out, or do I need to pass it to someone else, right? In lots of different ways. So I think it's important for pastors to kind of sit with that. Because they are oftentimes the place that people come. And so that's going to be different for every pastor as well, what they feel like they're equipped and even have space for, capacity for.
Yeah.
And so it's a little bit, I don't know, I've been asked this by pastors before, and it's like, well, I can't really answer that for you. I can give you maybe some questions that you can sit with that might help you come to that place and come to that understanding for yourself, because everybody's a little bit different. But I do think it's important that pastors not feel like they have to be the one for every, person who comes into their office, that it is okay to say, hey, this feels like more than I'm trained and equipped to handle. Because there is, and this is maybe a kind of a segue into some things. Like when we're talking anxiety, there's a lot we're learning about how like physical health impacts anxiety, the gut, the brain gut connection. So sometimes I have, we work with people who they're like, I just feel like there's a ton of anxiety in my body and I don't know where it's coming from. And we find out there's a medical piece to that. So this is maybe a helpful thing. Maybe I'll back up a second. When people hear me talk about anxiety, I often say there's kind of two components. There's a thought-based, a cognitive piece of anxiety. So sometimes people will say it's the what ifs, it's the worst case scenarios, it's the ruminating thoughts, it's feeling like I get stuck in my head and I have all this, right? There's another piece of anxiety that's very down in our body, a physiological. It's the tightness in my chest. It's the racing heart. It's the feeling in my gut. It's the jittery. Okay, so we talk about anxiety, there's kind of two pieces. When I'm evaluating somebody and I'm trying to understand what does anxiety look like in their life, I'm asking questions and I'm listening for, is it primarily one or the other? Is it both?
Yeah.
Because that can tell us something about where that anxiety is coming from and going up. I say all of that kind of to go back. Like pastors, maybe if they're reading a lot and have done some extra training, have that. But maybe they don't, and that's okay. Just like if I'm working with somebody and I start to sense like, I think you maybe need to see your primary care doctor. You need to get some blood work done. We need to check your levels. We need to look at hormones, right? Like we're treating the whole person, and it takes all of us to do that well because we're all trained. And then, I don't know, I just think that that's a healthy, like it's helpful to think about that big picture and to say, yeah, pastors can be a piece of that, and that there is a spiritual component. And sometimes it's really helpful to have a pastor on the treatment team, right?
Yeah, right.
But also on the flip side, for a pastor to say, I think it's also helpful to have a mental health therapist on the treatment team.
Yeah, I love it. Totally agree. I think there's just the humility piece of we all have our strengths, personalities, and training and when we can work together, I think we can, it's not just one piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
I don't want to back up a little bit more because you and I were chatting just a little bit before, and I think even just the topic of emotion is interesting. And again, I think it's something that some people might be kind of scared to dive into too much. But again, there's the characters in the Bible were emotional. Jesus is emotional. I think emotion is not something that we need to be afraid of or pretend doesn't exist. Can you just talk about that a little bit, maybe even from a faith perspective that you've studied and learned?
Yeah. Emotion is a part of who we are as humans. It's a part of how God created us and wired us. We often are like, I think we get afraid or fearful of emotion when we don't know what to do with it. When it's like, oh, what is this? Or, I think about when I work with kids and even teenagers, a lot of the work is helping them put language to what's happening, right? We need language we need to be able to label something and know what we're working with in order to figure out what to do with it. And a lot of people just weren't given those skills. And so I think some of it is just like, oh, okay, can I name this thing that's happening in my body and not be afraid of it? And I do think it's a way that we're growing as a culture. And I think it's a place we still have a lot of like room to grow. Like say expressions of emotion or even just awareness of emotion is we want to lean into that instead of like push back or, stuff it down. Because, and here's I can't claim this as my own, but I'll share it because I use it a lot with clients, is like, there's a couple different metaphors I use when I talk about emotion. One of those is like, if you're driving a car and a dash light comes on, right? A dash light tells us something about what's going on inside that vehicle.
Yeah.
And emotions are like those dash lights. So if we think about it as like, oh, it's telling me something about what's going on inside of me. Like maybe I could pay attention to that and it's helpful for me to know. Because if we ignore the dash light, right? If we ignore that fuel light when it comes on or the check engine light when it comes on, it probably is going to lead to more issues.
Yeah.
One of the things I work with clients is like, hey, give yourself permission to pay attention to the dash lights. Like, what's your system telling you about what's happening? Another metaphor I use is like, if you're driving down the road, again, like just you're paying attention to the signs, the street signs, because it tells you where you're at, where you're going, right? If there were no signs, it would make getting from point A to point B tricky. And so we rely on those things to kind of give us boundaries or give us direction. I think emotions often are those that can be this sign of like, you exit here or you don't exit here, or you need to slow down.
Yeah.
And so I think to say like it can be information that tells us something about what's happening within us and where we're at. And I just think like God's giving us that as a way to like know us and know him and know others. It's a connecting point. Like, right? Like emotions help us connect. They're information that helps us connect. And so I think it's something that we don't have to be afraid of.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be scary.
Right. And I think some people are, I don't know if this, obviously you know more than I do. Some people are maybe just wired differently where they're just kind of more naturally in touch with their emotions. Some people aren't at all. Yeah. And I'm just kind of curious, like, for people, assuming most people are kind of in the middle of that. Yeah,
there's a spectrum. Sure.
Yeah, that spectrum, sure. Is it pride? Are we just too busy that we don't take time to think about it? There's probably maybe a little bit of gender stuff in there, maybe.
I think there's still some gender stuff there. Yeah.
If someone is like, man, I just never really stopped to think about my emotions, what would you recommend people?
I think there's people there's just so many different ways to go about this. Like you're a parent of two, kiddos, you probably see it in your own kids, right? Like some people are big feelers, some aren't. Some people feel like, there's deeply feeling people who just like feel it deep in their bones, right? And then there's other people who are like, oh, it's like a blip. You don't notice it, but it's not, right? Yeah. We're all wired so differently, which is just the beauty of diversity, even in that. But so there's lots of different ways we could think about that and why that I think some of it is just in how we're created. Some of it is probably how we're socialized, the family of origins that we grow up in, and how emotion was talked about in our family of origin or not talked about. What sometimes in family of origins, it's like this set of emotion is okay to express. This
Right.
set of emotion, we're not gonna express that. So
Yeah.
there's lots of ways, right, that this shows up, which is why I think, it's good to develop this like, oh, okay, like pausing. I think that's the gift of counseling, honestly. It's this space where we're like, hey, you get to pause,
Yeah.
like think about these things and have somebody else like reflect them back to you and help you grow in your insight and awareness. And we don't do that a lot naturally
Yeah.
in our life. I mean, some people maybe are good about doing that. Most of us get pretty busy, right? But counseling is this space where we're like, hey, come in, let's do this work.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think there's a lot of factors, Matt, that keep people from, whether it's personality or it's socialization or whatever, but
Yeah.
it's important work for all of us. Some people maybe have a longer ways to go than others.
Yeah.
How they're
Well,
wired.
speaking of that, the wiring and the kind of individualistic part of it, I'm sure there are probably some, when you're working with someone, there might be some very specific things that you prescribe clients to do or to think differently or whatever. I know therapy is definitely not a one size fits all thing, but do you have some kind of just general tips and practices for, again, sometimes pastors are some of the busiest people I know, and they may not feel like they have the space to get some help that they may be needing. And I just
Yeah.
know from experience that it's a
Yeah.
taxing job, right? So if some of our listeners are kind of wrestling with some of these kinds of things, do you have some kind of general advice, or do you have something specific you want to pass on? Just how can we start to deal with this if this is something we're facing?
Sure. Yeah. Love the question. Love when it gets practical. So, I mean, going back to what I said about even being able to say, am I noticing that I am really activated a lot where it's feeling a lot more like anxiety, or am I kind of in a depressed state?
Yeah.
Even being able to identify the difference in that
Hmm.
can be a helpful first step when we think about what do I do next? Because if what I'm realizing is everything feels really sped up, I'm hyper vigilant. I'm feeling like I'm just right. I'm really activated all the time. I'm anxious. I'm spinning. We're going to want to do a lot of things that like ground, right? We want to come down from that. So I can maybe talk about that. If it's hypo, right? The depressed, the more kind of numbed out or low motivation, we're going to want to do things that like activate, bring us up, right? So even understanding like, where am I at?
Yeah.
What's happening within me? Which is, again, why we want to pay attention to the dash lights, right? Because we have to increase our awareness of what's happening within our body, with what's happening within our mind before we know where to go. Because if I have a really depressed person and I'm like, hey, let's just keep bringing things down, they're like, this does not feel helpful.
Yeah. I'm already down. Yeah. Right.
So it's important to know where we're starting, to know where we need to go, right? Like you can't read a map unless you can figure out where you're at, right? And so, yeah, then I think from there, we're kind of talking a little bit more about anxiety today. So, and I think that anxiety often is maybe more prevalent. I think a lot of people can resonate with that. So, a lot of like, you heard me use the word grounding. Grounding is like, grounding is a lot of like using our senses, which I love this idea, even like we see it in scripture of like, like Jesus getting away and like, being, like there's this like nature, like the Bible talks about like nature crying out, like there's a sense of like connectedness, right? So when I think about anxiety feels like this, what happens is it like pulls us out. It maybe pulls us into the future, but we're like disconnected. We're maybe disconnected from our body. We're disconnected from people. There's like this disconnect.
Yeah.
Grounding is this idea of like coming back, like
Mm.
back to the moment. We can
Mm.
do that through our senses, right? What are things I see? What are things I hear? Um,
Mhm.
so a quick Google search of grounding can like pull some like exercises or, but it's this, I think we have to start slowing down and paying attention. So
Yeah.
even like go for a walk, and instead of like putting on our headphones and, you know, overstimulating,
Consuming. Yeah.
consuming, it's like, could I just like notice 5 really beautiful things
Mm.
on my walk?
Mhm.
Can I notice
Mhm.
that? Could I notice what it feels like to move my body? Like, how does my body feel as I'm walking or I'm running? Could I like listen for sounds? Like, what are the sounds I hear? What,
Yeah.
right? And it's this idea of like reconnecting and like slowing down and coming back.
Mhm.
I think those kind of practices can be helpful. They also can be challenging for people. So I want to say, like, I know that this takes practice, just like anything. And if somebody's really having a hard time with that, I'd say, like, that might be a sign that it could be helpful to learn to do this with another person. Like, therapy
Mm.
would be helpful
Yeah.
because we're going to do this together.
Yeah.
So, yeah, like those are practical, maybe some practical things. Yeah, that idea of connection. Like, I even think about in Philippians where Paul's saying, like, do not be anxious about anything, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
I think anxious, like there's a sense of like coming back into who do you trust? Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything with prayer and petition, right? He's saying, like,
Right.
who do you trust?
Mhm.
Can we come back? It's pulling us back into this moment, right?
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
even times in my life where I'm anxious about something, I'm spinning, right? I'm thinking
Mhm.
about all the what ifs and what could happen, and I'm trying to plan and manage it all. And there's this invitation to like come back in the moment, come back
Mhm.
to trust, come back to connection.
Mhm.
It just even, like even in the Old Testament, when God is saying, do not be afraid, for I am with you, there's this
Mhm.
connection piece, right? He's
Yeah.
saying, like, remember, you're not alone. I'm here with you.
Mhm.
Connection. And so things that kind of bring us back
Mhm.
can be really helpful.
Yeah, that's really good. And my next question, maybe the answer is what you just finished saying, but if there's something else, I want to give you a chance. One thing I always feel for people like you, for therapists, you have to carry a lot as a therapist. You're carrying a lot of pain, a lot of very hard things. And I think a lot of pastors are in a similar boat. A lot of people listening have to carry a lot. And so is there anything unique to pastors, therapists, church leaders that you think they need to do to help kind of release some of that? How have you been able to do that?
I think the things that I'm inviting people into, I have to practice them myself.
Yeah.
Like I say this to my clients a lot, like, I know this is hard work. I'm doing this hard work too. You're not seeing
Mm.
it, right?
Yeah.
In
Right.
the moment, but I'm
Yeah.
telling you I am.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, for me, that means like what I'm talking about, like moving my body. I don't listen. I try to like go on walks without any podcasts or music
Yeah.
regularly. Try to notice like where I'm at and what's happening. There are days that do feel heavy. And so then I'm like, okay, what do I need to do with this? Releasing it,
Mm-hmm.
whether that be releasing it in prayer, releasing that in movement, having, a therapist myself, or yeah, staying connected in my own life, my own relationships, right? Whether that be with my husband or with my friends or my family, like feeling that, making sure I'm doing the things that are going to kind of take care of my, we talk about that wellness
Mm-hmm.
line, right? That I'm
Yeah.
doing those things as well. So I think, yeah, we have to pay attention to that. If I don't pay
Mm-hmm.
attention to that, then it really impacts how I do my work and how I show up for clients and what I'm like the work I'm able to do. Like I want to bring the healthiest version of me into the therapy room because that's where we're going to do the best work.
Right.
And I think that means I got to take care of me some too.
Mm-hmm. And I think, unfortunately, pastors and church leaders are sometimes some of the worst people at doing this, right? They give and give and give, and they don't take the time to do it for themselves. I mean, I'm guilty of that too. I think most people listening probably are.
Sure.
So,
Yeah, and none of us stay in balance all the time. I don't either,
mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
But like, I think so much of it, Matt, comes back to like, are we are we willing to pay attention?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Read the dash.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then notice, hey, I think I need I need to give something attention, right? So like
Mhm.
one of the tells for me is when I come home from work and my kids are like needing stuff and I feel like, whoa, like I can feel it in my body,
Yeah.
like frustration. You're like, one more person's asking something of me. I'm like,
Mhm.
oh, okay, there's a dash light, right? Like
Yeah.
I need to pay attention to that. And I
Mhm.
need to kind of figure out what do I need to do with that so that I can show up, for them the way I want to show up for them. And so does that mean I need to adjust my schedule at work? Does that mean I need to take a walk
Mhm.
or whatever? But I think we have to pay attention. We have to
Yeah.
learn to pay attention. If we
Yeah.
don't pay attention, then we're not reading the dash lights and we can't adjust to what needs to be adjusted to.
Yeah. That's really good. It's really helpful, Erica. Thank you. You've done a great job of getting some of the really practical stuff. Can I ask you one nerdy kind of philosophy
Sure.
kind of question about that's related to this? So you
Yeah.
mentioned anxious generation. I don't remember if is Jonathan Haidt. Is that?
Yep. Jonathan Knight. Yep.
I heard an interview. It may have been him. I can't remember. But someone was kind of theorizing about like, are we actually more anxious now than in previous generations? They're just kind of doing, just a kind of a thought experiment on that.
Mhm.
And whoever this person was saying that with the whole Maslow's hierarchy of needs things,
Sure.
in our world, like you and I, we don't have to go out and hunt every day. We're not running away from tigers, right? So they were kind of making this argument that as society and culture progress, and we don't really have to focus on our most basic needs as much as our ancestors did.
Mhm.
They were saying that's maybe why we're so anxious, is we have honestly more time. Like we don't have to worry about survival as much, and so we're kind of in our heads. We're maybe a little bit more self-actualizing or whatever, and that's maybe
Yeah.
why we spend so much time dwelling about problems, is because we have the time to do that.
Right.
Do you think that holds
No.
any water? How would you?
I mean, it's an interesting theory. It's funny that we're having this conversation today. Just this morning, one of my clients was like, "Do you ever think about like generations before us and if they were anxious or they were dealing with us?" So it's funny that like just this morning I was
Yeah.
having a kind of conversation with a client about this. But yeah, I think there's something about and maybe what we're getting into here is a little bit of the difference between fear and anxiety. Like
Okay.
fear is this response to threat. I think that
Mhm.
we're a lot more like what you're saying,
Yeah.
threats, right? Like we're not, and so there's maybe less to be afraid of. Anxiety can be this sense of like anxiety is this kind of heightened sense of needing to kind of prepare or
Mhm.
manage things like I often say, it's like things that haven't happened yet.
Right.
It's like that sense of if you think about your body as a house, it's the alarm system.
Mm.
So, in order to survive, we have to pay attention to threats, right? It makes
Hmm.
sense. Like
Hmm.
our brain is like wired to pay attention to threat. We don't have, I mean, some people in some places in the world, and even some places within,
Hmm.
America, there's a lot of real threats. There's still,
Yeah.
think about Maslow's, right? Like there's still a sense of I've got to work really hard to make sure I'm safe. But for a lot of us, maybe we're not living in that place, but we can start to feel like, oh, it's my job to
Hmm.
predict or manage or stay in front of any bad thing that could happen.
Yeah.
And I think that's where anxiety can kind of show up, is like when we start to feel like I've got to manage it all. And so, yeah, maybe it is different in the sense of like we're not trying to just survive, though some people still
Mhm.
will. So there's more space for things. I mean, it's an interesting theory. I
Well,
don't.
part of why I was thinking that is like, are future generations going to be in even more trouble than we are? Like as AI kind of takes over, and I know you work with a lot of kids and youth. Are you seeing? Are they? But again, I also see this kind of new thing where they're a little bit more open to getting
Mhm.
help and therapy. So I guess I know we're probably going to go over time here, but as you
That's
look at
okay.
the next generation, do you have things that you think they are either more at risk for or that you're kind of impressed with as you're dealing with them?
I do think phones and technology are impacting mental health in significant ways.
Yeah.
Um, because they're impacting how people connect and interact. in such, it's really changing the way teenagers socialize or don't socialize, right? Like they are spending way more time interacting on a phone and less time. I mean, research is telling us less time interacting face to face.
Yeah.
And we are social beings. Our nervous system, we like know that we regulate best when we are with other regulated people.
Yeah.
I mean, they're mirror neurons, and we can totally nerd out about all of the neurobiology of things, but like we need to be in the presence of others.
Yeah.
And so I do think that some of this disconnect, and like, you know, teenagers are having a harder time figuring out, how do I interact in healthy ways? Because they have a lot of anxiety actually about face-to-face social interactions because they're using their phones so much to do that. So I do think there are some very real things that we're seeing. Comparison filters, right? Like it's the things that we know, but you do see that a lot with teenagers. You know, it is an interesting thing about how it's shaping them, shaping their brains, shaping their interactions, kind of barriers that come up because of that. So I think it's things that we need to pay attention to. There's a lot of people that are a lot smarter than me and doing a lot of like really cool research and helping us understand, like, you know, we maybe didn't think about this when the first, you know, smartphone showed up in our hand. We weren't necessarily considering the impact it would have on kids, especially, and kids' brains during these formative times. And now we're like kind of catching up and trying to figure it out. And I think that's why there's a lot of parents, you know, like the Wait Till 8th, you know, campaign where it's this idea that we're like inviting parents to wait until 8th grade, at least, to give their kid a smartphone. There's research that says you should wait till 16 to let them on social media because, you know, and so I think parents are also starting to catch up. We're dealing with this. We have an almost a 10-year-old. And so like, we're thinking about this at our house too, but just this idea that like, oh, okay, we need to put some boundaries on some of this because we're realizing the impact. And so, there's going to be new technologies, and we're going to continue to have to think well about these things and have these kind of conversations. I think it's why we need to keep having the conversations, because it's so much easier to do this as a community or, you know, locked arms with other parents or, you know, than it is to try and do this on our own. So,
Yeah, totally agree. Well, you've been really generous with your time. Last question. We'll get you out of here on this one. Again, we're not expecting our audience to be experts in this. I want to be very pro therapy, but I also imagine do you have a couple go-to resources, books, podcasts, TED Talks, either for parents or pastors do you have kind of just, what's a good place to get started for someone who would just be helpful for them to have in their arsenal of resources? Do you have a couple recommendations?
Yeah. Kurt Thompson is a great resource. He integrates faith and neurobiology in really, really incredible ways. He's got some really great resources. He's got a podcast. He's got some books. He's the one that I'm like always recommend. Yeah. And he kind of covers different topics there. Parenting wise, Dan Siegel's stuff on parenting. If people are really like kind of wanting to know, how do I kind of parent with like what we know now about emotion and neurobiology. Dan Siegel is a great resource for parents. Also, Daystar Counseling out of Sissy Goff and Matt Thompson. See, look at me pulling names out.
Nice, way to go.
I'm getting those right. Anyways, their stuff is really great for parents and for teenagers. They have some really great resources for kids, parents, teenagers. They have a podcast as well that's really great. So, and if I think of some other ones, maybe I'll email them and you put them in the podcast kind of notes. But those are some that come to mind as far as just the kind of place where these things can intersect. So,
Oh, that's great. You've been very generous with your time. I'm keeping you longer than I said I would. So thank you for being here.
Great
talking to you. Again, this is such an important topic, especially for church leaders. So thanks for helping to walk us through it today. Grateful for the time.
Thanks for having me.
Well, one more time, many thanks to Erica for that really helpful conversation and so much wisdom, such good reminders that emotional health is never intended to be a luxury. It's definitely not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of health, and it's something that I think we all need to be reminded of from time to time. So thank you, Erica. I loved her dash lights analogy there. So man, if that's you, if you're seeing some lights in your dash that need some attention, I encourage you. I know it's hard to find the time, but do it. Carve out some time to really think about that, work your way through it. There's no shame in seeing a therapist or a counselor, so do what you need to do so you can take care of yourself, so you can continue to pour out and serve your congregation. This is big, important stuff. All right, and with that, I think we'll go ahead and wrap it up for today. So once again, thanks so much for listening. Have a great week ahead, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time here on Lead Pods.
Thanks for listening to Lead Pods. Make sure you don't miss an episode by subscribing to our show wherever you're listening today. Learn more by visiting usmb.org, and be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We'll see you next time as we learn more practical tools to increase our impact together.